Hey guys, welcome to my video. I thought it would be beneficial for me to make a small video of how I assembled and built this Paludarium step by step. I apologize for the lack of photos before this photo. I thought I took more, but I didn't. If you're interested in how to get started, there are other YouTube videos on how to get the foam, how to lay the bark, etc., etc. In this case, we're starting off with my pump, and you got to make sure that if you're going to have a water feature in your paludarium or in your tank, it really needs to be laid out from the start, or else you can really screw this up. So I was laying out the plumbing, making sure everything was going to fit correctly, and I wasn't going to have any issues. Once this pump is in and everything is built around it, you won't have access to this pump. So it's pretty much in there for the life of the tank. You can see that I used some PVC pipe in order to run my hose upwards, because when that foam starts to expand, it will squish that hose, not allowing any water to get to its destination. So if you're trying to pump water to somewhere else in the tank and you only have that tube around the foam, that foam will expand enough and pinch that hose off. So be sure to use some kind of PVC pipe. It's really important. Here you see the pump in a semi-small basket aligned with some mesh that I picked up from Home Depot. This is that weed guard that you can find at Home Depot. And again, this was all thinking ahead that if something clogs that pump, it's going to be rendered useless. So I wanted to make sure that nothing could really get to that pump and other than water. This is a back view of the tank. I used two kinds of foams, solid foam, because I wanted to put some shelving in there, and also the spray foam, which you can see that hasn't really cured yet. The white foam is just simple styrofoam, but it's a lot easier to carve than the spray foam, and everything gets pretty messy, which you'll see here pretty soon. It's easier for you guys to work with the tank on its back, just because it allows gravity to assist you. If you're working with the tank sitting upright, everything would just fall off. So make sure that you have the tank laid on its back when you're sealing everything. I sourced some local rocks from the quarry. I was sure to boil the crap out of everything just because I didn't want any bacteria or contaminants in the tank. My tank is still cycling. You'll see that at the end of the video. But I just want to make sure all your rocks are really clean. You don't want to bring anything foreign into the tank, especially if you're going to have dart frogs or some kind of amphibian that could easily get sick. So here's the tank all dried, all my bark in place, all my wood. I got some of my rocks in. I'm just making sure everything is right. You'll notice that I have a huge gap from the bottom portion of my glass up until where my bark starts. Well, this is also important because you're going to have a drainage layer, and you're also going to have soil and plants. So take that into consideration when you're laying out your tank. And here's just a few images of where I carved out some sections of the spray foam where I'm going to insert some rocks. I went through a lot of silicone doing this, and you'll notice that once that spray foam gets on some of the bark, it's almost impossible to get off. This is where my waterfall is going to be. So everything is kind of layered step by step, and so far it's looking good. I think I did a decent job of laying the rocks out. And be sure to silicone everything really well. That spray foam is very porous once you start to work with it, and don't be afraid to overdo it with the silicone. You don't want any of these rocks falling off and damaging the glass. For some of my bigger rocks, you could see that I actually dug out some of the spray foam in order to cradle those rocks a little bit better. And I didn't think it was necessary. I was just being super cautious. You don't have to do it that way. Here's another portion of all my layers. It's really hard to tell, but this large branch coming off the left of your screen actually comes forward a few inches, and all of these different heights allow my future dart frog to climb the height of my tank, which I think will be kind of nice. So here we have the full tank. Everything's dried. I still have a lot more rocks to place. I've done a lot of carving, and all the bark is exposed where I want it to be. This is a very tedious process, and it took me days, but I think the final outcome will be very nice, and you'll see that at the end of the video. Here you can see this large rock. I actually carved out the foam so this rock could be inserted into the foam halfway. Again, this was kind of a heavy rock, so I wanted to make sure I wasn't going to have any issues with it falling in the future. Last thing you want is your tank to be fully set up and have a huge gaping hole where a rock used to be, and all you're left with is exposed foam. Again, here's another photo of a carving where I had a little shelf. I wanted to make this look as natural as possible, so if you ever go into nature, you can see where the rock is actually just kind of jutting out from the dirt rather than sitting on top of the dirt. And here's a side view of what I was trying to accomplish, where I carved out that piece of the foam so I can have a rock in there, almost acting as its own shelf. And it looks kind of nice. I'll get some close-up photos of this for you so you can see how it turned out. But overall, it's going to be a lot of carving, a lot of measuring. And as we talk about measuring, here's the egg crate. So I was kind of measuring for my drainage layer, and what was more important to me was the weight of this whole tank. So I went with a huge gap from the bottom of my bark to the bottom of my tank is probably a good 4 or 5 inches, maybe more. And the reason I did this is because I was going to fill it up with mostly that square foam. So I was going to adhere square foam to the bottom of my tank just for displacement purposes. I didn't want to add a ton of rock in there. I also didn't want a ton of water in my tank. Last thing I want is for there to be a fractured piece of glass at the bottom, because this thing weighs a ton. And then I come home to all sorts of water on the floor. So I really made a point to measure as best as I can, and adding enough of the square styrofoam in there, but putting it or laying it out in a way that would allow for good water flow. So I didn't want any stagnant water. So you'll notice in some of these photos coming up that the water could actually penetrate throughout the tank and actually circulate. So here we have all my moss. This was gonna make up my my texture for all my foam. And again, you're gonna go through a lot of silicone, so I strongly suggest working one area at a time, because it does dry pretty quickly. So I've started to apply my mixture of moss, and again, there are YouTube tutorials on how to make moss. So you just look up, whatever you got to look up, just how to make terrarium moss or paludarium moss or texture. I'm sure you'll find a how-to on that. I didn't want to make this video too long, since if you're looking at this video, you probably have a good understanding of what you're trying to attempt anyway. So you can see it's starting to come together. This is my rock and my texture. It kind of looks really natural. I went ahead and I vacuumed all the excess off just so I can make sure everything was adhering correctly. You may have to go back. You may have to go back, 1, 2, 3 times if you miss sections, but allow everything to dry before you pull the vacuum out and start sucking it off, because you will pull off a lot of the silicone. Here you can see where the bark is, some of my stone, my branches. I wanted it to look like a tree almost. I did use various woods. So I think I have some African like cichlid wood. I'm not sure what the correct term is, but you can see it right here on the lower right of your screen. That's for an aquarium. That piece of wood was pretty heavy. I think I sourced that at a local like a pawn shop for like $5. And then the bigger stuff I found locally. Once the tank was all dry, I got in there with my air compressor and I just blew everything off that was loose. I know this kind of looks aggressive if you have an air compressor, but you know, if you had a big chunk on there that was barely hanging on, this would get it off and it would allow you to go back and cover it with some more silicone and throw some texture on there. So the tank is starting to come together. Everything's good. Oh, I forgot to mention, make sure you test your pump out before you install it. So I went ahead and I checked my pump before I ran all my plumbing. As soon as I got it out the box, I tested the pump to make sure it was going to work. And get a strong enough pump if you're trying to send water kind of high into the tank. So I'm sending water maybe 24 inches vertically. So get a strong enough pump that could send water vertically. Don't get too large of a pump because then you're going to be stuck with problems. Here we go. I'm starting to measure out all my foam at the bottom, along with the egg crate, along with my my little fibrous mesh that won't allow any particles to get to my pump. So my pump's happily and is encased in his little home. I've got my foam, which is going to displace the amount of water I utilize, the amount of rocks I use. So here you go. Here's the silicone I used, 100% silicone. Be sure if you're going to have any fish or amphibians in your tank, you want to use something that won't harm them. I kind of went a different direction, but this was the start of my water feature where I just used the egg crate and applied a ton of silicone to it, and I just started adhering all the rocks to it to kind of give me that natural rock wall and transition from water to land. Once I got my tank up and going, I realized there was too much water and not enough land, so I kind of adjusted things after the fact. But this gives you a good idea if you want to go in that direction, rather than having a bunch of rocks just piled on top of each other aimlessly. You can kind of build a small section of wall, put it in place, and then fill the gaps with smaller rocks. And I like it. This also allows the water to flow to the pump, so you have a constant recirculating system rather than any stagnant water, because if you get a lot of stagnant water in the tank, it's just going to end up smelling, the bacteria is going to grow, and it's just going to get out of control. So you want to make sure your water has good circulation. Again, this is just some of the rocks. It started to grow and grow and grow. I was adding small rocks to fill in the gaps. I'm pretty confident I used both of these, but I don't remember. But it gives you a good idea of how versatile silicone and just local rocks work. I boiled all of these, so you shouldn't have to worry about any bacteria. Now I'm working on the interior of the tank. You can see I'm starting to lay down that waterproof membrane. I've used 2 layers of foam on the left hand side, which is why it's kind of high. But that's what I was looking for. This is the look I was going for. I didn't want a very bland looking aquarium. I wanted levels. I wanted it to look very natural. And overall, for my first build, it came out pretty good. So waterproof membrane, and here it is without the membrane, so you can see what I'm talking about. I built the layers of foam up. You can see on my channels that allow all the water to get to the pump in the back, so there's no stagnant water. It's encapsulated in its little membrane itself, on top of another membrane to prevent any debris from getting into it. So again, this is just something I wanted to do. You don't have to do it. Excuse me. But with all that foam in there, that's going to displace the amount of water you have to use and the amount of material you have to use, whether it's rock or soil, because all of that will add substantial weight, especially water. Water is really heavy. So I wanted to avoid having this tank weigh a ton, especially if I had to move it in the future. So I could easily get in there and grab some of these rocks. And here you can see I have way too many rocks in this. When I got done with this section, I realized that this was too many rocks. So if I was going to have a couple dart frogs in there, it it wouldn't suffice because they wouldn't have enough ground cover. They wouldn't have enough soil. They wouldn't have any places to hide. So it started to come together. At least this was the first run, and this was all taken down after the fact. Once I got my plants in there, I made a few adjustments, and you'll see that in the next slide. But overall, I wanted my waterfall to kind of flow into the middle of my tank. Here you can see it doesn't even look like the egg crate is there. So it's pretty fluid. So if you're going to go that route, be sure to add little rocks here and there so it gives it a more natural look. And you just don't have this real ugly rock wall, I'd say. And here it is. Here it is with the plants. It looks good. The plants have matured. So I'll let you guys take a look at what it looks like currently and enjoy. Thanks for tuning in. If you guys have any questions, leave them in the comments section. I'll be sure to get back to you. Thanks.